What's going on, guys? So I'm going to assume that if you're watching this video, you are one of two people. Either number one, you're an agency owner slash growth operator who wants to start running paid ads for your clients, or number two, you're an info product owner that wants to scale your offer through paid ads. Or I guess number three, you're just really bored and you ended up on this video for some reason. Either way, if you're number one or two, this video is going to be insanely valuable for you because at the time that I'm recording this, we are managing right around $1 million a month in ad spend for our clients only in the info product space. So in this video, you're going to get a full A to Z guide when it comes to everything pre-launch, launching your ads, and then even scaling your ads upwards of 10K a day in spend. However, if you get to the end of this video and you're still a little confused and you don't really know exactly how to go about it, I would encourage you to click the link down below, book a call and speak with me, and that way I can help you directly hands-on. But I'm more than confident that this video is going to give you a ton of clarity and exact actionable steps to go and follow to scale your offer or your client's offer with paid ads. So let's get right into it. What's going on, guys? Welcome to the Paid Ads for Info Products free course. So in phase one here, we're going to be covering everything that you need pre-launch. So essentially everything you need to get prepared to launch your paid ads. So before we get into any of the tactical stuff, let's just go over at a high level why you eventually need to transition to paid ads. So over the past 3 years, I've worked with dozens and dozens of info products, and after working with all of them, I would feel very confident in saying that scaling to cold traffic isn't this nice thing that is optional and, it's one of those things where it's like, oh, maybe I'll do ads at some point. It's inevitable. Because the truth is that basically no one maintains their peak organic numbers for more than 2 to 3 years. So if you're an info product doing a couple 100,000 a month or even a couple million a month, odds are 1 to 2 years from now, you're not going to be doing those same numbers from just organic. And with that being said, everyone eventually has to lean into paid. It's just, do you want to do it when your business is going well and organic is crushing and you can kind of just make this stress-free transition into paid, start by supplementing your organic traffic with paid traffic, and then, eventually just scale into paid? Or do you want to do it when your business is crumbling and you kind of need to save it? So it makes absolutely zero sense for anyone who is crushing with organic to be running no paid ads, just because you have so many people in your ecosystem. You get the very minimum just be running some hammer them ads, some basic direct response retargeting ads that you spend maybe 20, 30K a month on, and you probably bring back a 3 to 5X on, et cetera, et cetera. But in my opinion, it's got to be more than this at some point. You can do just the bare minimum in the beginning and kind of just get some exposure to paid ads, but eventually you're going to want to scale into it. And in my opinion, the only way to build an info product is with the intention of scaling to cold traffic. So you need to nail the positioning from day one, you need to nail the offer, and you need to nail kind of everything in between with the end goal in mind of scaling to paid traffic. But ultimately, when you end up transitioning into paid ads, this is how you buy back stability and control and kind of just boost the lifespan of your offer. So that's why I'm saying to think with the end in mind and build your offer with the ability to scale to cold from day one. So the reason why I say buying back stability and control is just because I haven't worked with an offer that's straight organic in a while, but what I would say is when I used to work with clients who were only doing organic, it's one of those things where it's you almost just kind of hope and pray for more volume. You're oh, hopefully my videos keep doing well, or hopefully the creator keeps posting more, etc. And it's it's almost just you're playing the game at a very beginner level, whereas with paid, it becomes a lot more linear to scale. And it feels a lot more like a real business rather than when you're doing organic only, it kind of just feels like you're a creator that has a business on the back end, if that makes sense. So the analogy that I want to compare this to is scaling with organic is trying to date in your hometown, and then scaling with paid is being able to date all around the world. And it's one of those things where it's yeah, at the end of the day, you could find your partner in your hometown, and that's kind of the equivalent of you could have a really good business off of just organic, but it's think about everything else that's out there. Think about how much upside there is in dating throughout the entire world. Think about how much more potential there is just to do amazing things when you have the entire world. And it's one of those things where it's once you start dating throughout the entire world, you're never going to go back to just dating in your hometown. You're oh my God, I can't believe I only did that. But at the same time, if you can't even date well in your hometown, you don't have very good odds when it comes to the rest of the world. So you kind of need to warm up here, get everything working here, and then you can go to the rest of the world. I don't know why I thought of that the other day, but I hope that makes sense. So essentially, if you're still not sold on doing paid ads for your offer, offering paid ads to your clients if you're a growth operator or a service provider, you need to understand the value of adding consistency and stability to your offer. It's one of those things where it's imagine if instead of just praying that your organic keeps printing or your Instagram doesn't get banned or your YouTube channel, keeps traction or whatever, imagine if you just knew, okay, I have this mechanism for out. What would that do for your peace of mind, just knowing that your offer is not just going to crumble one day because, your views slow down. The next thing is you have to understand that, like I said, inevitably everyone pivots to paid. Okay, so hopefully at this point you're sold on the idea of transitioning to paid ads, and odds are you wouldn't be watching this video if you weren't. So now that we've covered why, let's address the rest of the beginner questions you might have. So when should I start running ads? So what I would say is this is subjective. Like there's no, cookie cutter answer where it's like, oh yeah, 6 months into your offer, you should be running paid. What I would say is that it makes sense to start running ads for your offer once you feel that your organic infrastructure is operating very well. So if you feel really confident in your sales team and your entire marketing process and just like the way everything runs organically, that's when it's time to transition into paid. Or if you're launching the offer from scratch and you don't have an organic following, then obviously you kind of just need to start from day one, and this is the only way you're going to make it work. And the next question is, who should be running my ads? So if you're an offer owner, should you be running the ads? Should you have a media buyer, et cetera, et cetera? Now, what I would say is that if you're the offer owner and your beginner budget is going to be less than like 20 to 30K a month, it almost like doesn't even make sense to hire a media buyer right off the bat, because it's one of those things where it's like, why would you spend 10, 20, 30K a month and then pay a media buyer like a quarter of that or a fifth of that just to manage the budget? It's one of those things where it's like, if you can learn how to run ads yourself, obviously you don't have to do it for the rest of the time, but it just makes a lot more sense to do it in the beginning when you're first starting out, just in terms of saving budget and whatnot. But then also at the same time, like it's one of those things where it's really hard to hire for something if you have zero idea how it works on your own, and you have no idea if the person who you hired is doing a good job. You have no idea like what the baseline of results is, etc. So what I would say is like in the beginning, if you think you have the capacity for it, I would encourage anyone who's spending less than like 20 to 30K a month just to try to run their own ads. Now, beyond that, once you get to the point where you're spending 50K a month, 100K a month, multiple hundreds of thousands a month, I think it makes a lot of sense in that position to hire a marketer. Now, there's a key difference here. The difference between a media buyer and a marketer to me is very simple. A media buyer who is typically paid like 5 to 10% of ad spend or like a flat retainer, maybe $5,000 a month, they are strictly just like a button pusher. Like they understand how Facebook works. They understand what data to look at. They understand how to launch campaigns, how to test, when to kill campaigns, when to scale, et cetera. That's really it. The difference between a media buyer and a marketer is that the media buyer just does stuff within Facebook, and a marketer understands the entire customer journey and the entire process. So like for me, for example, I do a lot more than just media buying for my clients. I'll go and design their funnels. I'll rewrite VSLs. I'll do all the email copy. I'll write all their webinars. I'll script new ads. I'll do all the media buying on top of that and everything in between. But what I'm saying is like it makes a big difference in terms of the responsibility and also the compensation for a media buyer versus a marketer. Now look, if you already have a marketing team, you already have an email guy, and you have someone who does your webinars and your VSLs and your funnel design, et cetera, you might just want a media buyer in that situation. But if you're someone where like you don't have a lot of marketing infrastructure, it makes a lot of sense to hire one marketer, keep it all within one roof, someone who's doing your paid ads, your organic strategy, and everything in between. Next question is, where should I be sending my traffic? So we're going to go into that into a second, but essentially you only have a few choices when it comes to like standard info product funnels. Like you have low ticket to high ticket, you have call funnels, you have webinars, you have challenges, you have DM ads, and those are really like the main ones. So it's really just like a process of elimination I'm going to walk you through in a second. And how much do I need to start? Very common question. So the beginner testing budget that I recommend for all my clients is set aside 20 to 30K that you're okay spending throughout the course of a month, and you have zero attachment to that money. Like you could spend all 30 grand of it and you're not going to stress about it. So with that being said, like most people don't want to start running ads until they're in that like 50 to 100K a month ballpark. And honestly, that's where I think it makes sense to start looking into paid ads. But in terms of budget, I would say put aside 20 to 30K for a month. So that's around $700 to $1,000 a day. And that really gives you a good swing at it. Okay, so step number 2 is, and I was just teasing this a little bit, is positioning your offer for cold. So what I mean by this is your offer a lot of the time is just something that you've sold to your organic audience, and it works because your organic audience knows, likes, and trusts you. But I would say around half of the people that I've worked with when they're trying to transition from organic to cold, depending on the niche and depending on the offer type, they have to make some pretty serious adjustments to be able to actually have it be profitable to see success on cold traffic. So I want to give you kind of a non-exhaustive list of what to consider when it comes to trying to figure out if your offer is positioned for success on cold traffic. Obviously, this isn't everything that you could consider. It'd be really hard for me to boil every single nuance point into a YouTube video, but here's just a few things. So first thing I would say is, can you position the offer to a financially qualified demographic? So what I mean by this is like the organic dropshipping kind of offers, like those usually don't do as well to cold traffic, because organic dropshipping is inherently a business that's made for people with like little to no money who want to just kind of like spin up a store and, maybe make like a few $1,000s a month. So that's one big thing to remember is like something like that versus like an investment real estate kind of offer. Like a lot of broke people, from what I've seen at least, if you position your offer properly, are not going through like real estate funnels just because they understand like, okay, I am broke. I do not have money to go and buy a bunch of Airbnbs or go and buy a bunch of Section 8 houses, etc. Obviously, some people position it as like, oh, no money down or whatever, but that's kind of like slippery slope. But I'd say either way is when you have an offer where people inherently understand like, okay, I need money to do this, it kind of just helps a lot with overall lead quality and attracting financially qualified people. Whereas if you have an offer that is inherently built for broke people, when you position it on cold the same way that you position it on organic, you're going to have a lot of issues with broke people. The next thing is something that I came up with. I call it the mall test. So essentially, like I had a friend who was wondering about selling his offer that he sold on organic to cold traffic. I was like, I think the offer is a little bit too complicated. Like kind of like the positioning of the offer is a bit too complicated. And the example I gave him is like, look, if you went back home for Thanksgiving and you were shopping at the mall on Black Friday and you try to explain to one of your friends that you knew from high school what the business that you run is, would they understand? And that's kind of just like my visual representation of cold traffic, because obviously when you scale an offer to cold traffic, you're inherently just scaling it to people who are like very mid-curve IQ. And obviously those people are like still a lot of your buyers. So what I would say is that like there's a reason why things like Amazon FBA and like Airbnb and trading and all these other offers work on cold. It's because it's easy for people to grasp. Whereas like if you take some super niche offer that's like only revolving around the info product space, et cetera, and you try and scale it to cold, in my opinion, it's just an uphill battle. So the next question is, does your offer stand out against the crowd, and are you in a red ocean versus a blue ocean? So I'll give you some examples. So like in the free course and a couple other times, I've referenced this one offer that is like a fitness offer on steroids, no pun intended. It's like a fitness offer with a blood work protocol, and I'm assuming they charge really high ticket for it because it's positioned towards CEOs and business leaders, etc. That's a really good example of an offer that stands out against the crowd in a red ocean that is fitness offers. Or on the other hand of that, if you want to have success with cold, you can just sell something that's like relatively blue ocean. So there's a lot of niches where there's only a handful of people really scaling to cold traffic. Like some of my clients, honestly, we only have a handful of competitors, and that's one thing that makes it a lot easier for us is it's not like high ticket sales or e-com where you have like 50 different people that are all selling coaching and trying to run paid ads to coaching offers in that niche. So that's another thing to keep in mind. Now, the next question that you have to ask yourself is your answer facing a headwind or is it riding a tailwind? So a good example of this is like SMMA offers. So what I would say is like, obviously there's a lot of offers now that are doing decently, or some of them that are doing really well, where it's like SMMA repackaged, repositioned, etc. But if you just try to take like a normal SMMA offer and didn't try to spin anything new into it, and you just try to take that to cold traffic, I'd imagine that your odds of seeing success are a lot lower rather than like these new repositioned versions of it. So that's an example of facing a headwind. It's like, you know, people have been selling SMMA programs for over 10 years now. There's been hundreds of thousands of people that have bought these programs. Like at a certain point, you're kind of fighting an uphill battle. Whereas like a good example of riding a tailwind is like anything that has AI incorporated to it. And honestly, even now at this point, like the whole AI thing, in my opinion, is getting kind of played out. Like obviously, I really believe in AI long term. I'm just saying in terms of like info products that are trying to add AI into the name of it. But that's still a good example of riding a tailwind in the sense that like a lot of people are very interested in AI, how they can make money off of AI. So you have that working in your advantage rather than like facing a headwind like the SMMA example. The next question you have to ask yourself is, do you have proof of concept with other offers? So what I would say is like, ideally, it's not a bad thing if you have competitors on paid traffic. Obviously, if you have 100 competitors, it makes it a little harder. But if you're like the second mover, the third mover, that's honestly not a bad place to be at all because the first or second mover has already taken a bunch of that risk and kind of proved to you that it can work. And then you just have to figure out how to reposition your offer and make it better than theirs or just compete with them. So with that being said, if you have someone who has proof of concept in your niche, or if you already have proof of concept with your organic offer, it can give you insights into messaging, funnel strategies, etc., that you can use to kind of make your iteration process on paid a little bit smoother. Next thing is, and I kind of just touched on this, do you have proof of concept on organic that you can roll over? So obviously, like one of the easiest ways to just kind of transition into paid ads is going from being majority organic to like 80% organic, 20% paid. And then eventually you just kind of slide that scale into the point where you're like 50-50 between organic and paid. And maybe at a certain point, you even go to where the majority of your sales are coming from paid. But with that being said, like if you already have confidence in your offer on organic, that makes it so much easier to roll it into paid because you already understand what hesitations people have, what resonates with people that makes them buy, so you can amplify that in your paid sales process, et cetera, et cetera. So again, guys, not an exhaustive list, but just a handful of things to consider when you're positioning your offer for cold traffic. So step number 3 is deciding what funnel to start running ads to. So the simple answer to this question is, if you already have a funnel that's already converting well in organic, just use that, because you've already dialed in the process, you've perfected everything, your sales team is comfortable taking those calls or handling those leads, etc. But if not, it's really just a simple process of elimination. So like I said in the beginning of the video, you only have like a handful of options to really choose from. And the way that you choose, in my opinion, is you just have to understand that every funnel has a certain percentage of reliance on sales versus marketing. And it's important to understand this because, you know, you have strengths in your offer. Like maybe your strength is your sales team, so you want to lean into them a little bit. Or maybe you have one closer who's like kind of suspect in terms of his performance. So like you want to stay, you know, away from him in terms of reliance, and you're a really good marketer. But either way, I would say like these numbers are kind of up in the air, but this is just my opinion. I would say that call funnels are right around 50-50 in terms of marketing versus sales reliance. Like, you know, for you to see success with the call funnel, it's about 50% on the marketing side, about 50% on the sales side. Something like DM ads, I would say it's like 20% reliant on marketing, like 80% reliant on sales, just because usually with like DM ads, you don't have like a VSL or a landing page or anything like that you're sending them to. It's literally just like the first 10 seconds lifting for you and then the rest of the sales team. Next thing, like low ticket to high ticket, I would say it's around 75% marketing and around 25% sales, just because like the entire offer has to be really well done, the sales page, all the copy, VSLs, etc. And if that's not well done, you're not even going to get purchasers, so your sales team isn't really going to even get at bats. And then the last thing is like webinars, for example, are around 60% marketing and 40% sales. So point being with that is, you want to really take an objective look at your offer and be like, okay, what do I think my strengths are? What do you think my weaknesses are? If you think you're around the same strength on the sales and marketing side, I would just say go for something like a call funnel or webinar. Personally, my bias is to always just go for call funnels, and I can explain why later on in the video. But ideally, you're scaling a funnel that aligns with your ICP and has a high probability to convert. So what I mean by this is, if you have like a high net worth audience, you probably don't want to start with something like live webinars, just because the main bottleneck for a lot of high net worth people is that they don't have a lot of time. They just want to like figure out if the offer is for them. They just want something that's going to get them their information quick. They can figure out if the offer is for them, and then they can just buy it if they want. So I wouldn't go for something like live webinars. I would go for something like maybe a call funnel. Next thing is, it leans into the strengths of your current situation, like we just said. And the last thing is, it's something that has quick feedback loops and a quick iteration process. So what I mean by feedback loops is, take, for example, like a webinar or a challenge. Let's say that your hypothetical webinar was like on the 7th of the month, and you started spending on ads on the 1st of the month. So all the way from the 1st to the 7th, obviously you're running the ads, you're seeing the cost per lead fluctuate, et cetera, and then you run the webinar on the 7th. And then let's say, hypothetically, you're booking them to calls. And by the time you're through all of the calls and you can actually figure out like how profitable you were on ads, it's like the 10th or the 11th of the month. So it's by the time like you make that decision, you can't even run the next webinar until like the 18th of that month. And point being is, it has really long feedback loops. Whereas like something like a call funnel, I can put up call funnel ads tonight, I can have calls rolling in the morning, and my setters are talking to them immediately, I have lead fi data popping, et cetera, and I can see immediately the kind of leads that my ads are attracting. So that's something that has a really quick feedback loop, because if I understand like, oh, the lead quality on these is really bad, then we change the messaging on these ads. Oh, a bunch of people are showing up to the calls not understanding this thing, let me add this onto the front end, et cetera. It just makes the entire iteration process a lot quicker. Whereas like if you're trying to scale only webinars, like I said, you have like a 10 to 14 day feedback loop sometimes that really prolongs your iteration process over the span of months, because it's like, for you to make a change, you can only run like maybe 2 or 3 webinars a month. So for you to make 10 changes, that takes 3 months, whereas like 10 changes on a call funnel can be done in like 3 weeks. You get my point? Okay, so step 4 is pre-launch, just a few more things to consider. So here's everything you need to have built out pre-launch for a VSL call funnel. Obviously, that's kind of my bias, like I've said. So you have a VSL that's built for cold traffic. So if you have one that's written like super direct for warm traffic, you're gonna need to pivot the VSL. The next thing is you need a landing page built out. So like the basic structure is just headline, VSL, application, and then you can add like social proof and then potentially sections underneath that are just like content based. Next thing is you want multiple proven angles to test through. So what I would say is like, we have different messaging angles for each of the offers we work with. So like, let's say for example, one of them is positioned to like a corporate audience, and then the next one is like, you know, a more general audience, and then the next one is like more of an investment focus, et cetera. I like to have 2 to 3 batches of like 10 different messaging angles. So what I mean by that is like, okay, those 3 groups I just named off, I would want to have around 10 different ads within each of those groups, or 20 or 30 total, just so that way if I throw one of the ad groups up and it doesn't do well, I have another one on ice and I don't have to wait for the creator to film more ads. Next thing is you want like an application funnel built out properly with self-liquidating offer and then conditional logic. So what I mean by that is like the type form has to be programmed properly. so that only qualified people are hitting your thank you page, so that way the pixel's only firing there, and then all the unqualified people can go to either like a downsell calendar or even like a low ticket offer if you have that. Next thing is you need to have like your sales team dialed, so obviously you're not really going to figure out if your sales team is good or not if you've never worked with them before until they actually start taking calls, but you want to just kind of use your best judgment and hire competent people. Next thing is you want all the pre-call processes dialed in, so you want like pre-call emails, SMS reminder flows, etc. You want to build your confirmation page the right way, so you want to have like a thank you page video, some FAQ videos, etc. We do the hammer them ads, and then we also just want to have proper tracking and data in place, so we do HighRoast and Leadfly for all of our clients. So the one thing to understand pre-launch is that you have to understand that your disadvantage when you start running paid ads is your lack of context and data around what works for you and your account. So the way to skew the odds of success back into your favor is to kind of have all of these boxes checked and build out your infrastructure properly before you ever put a dollar spend through. Just because if you start running ads and you don't have any data on your offer, you have no pixel conditioning, etc., and you have like 6 of these things that are, missing and some of them are done half-assed, like you're not putting yourself in a good position for success. So I would rather just put the time in, front load it, and just get all of this built out the right way, get everything set up the right way so that you go into it day one having the best odds of success possible. Another massively important concept to understand is that your success or lack of success with paid ads is around 40% dependent on what's going on inside of Facebook ads. So, your creatives, the targeting, the campaign structure, etc., and around 60% dependent on the infrastructure you're running the ads to. So like we talked about in one of the last steps, like picking the funnel that you run the ads to with intention, and then also everything else that goes into the infrastructure. So when it comes to like the funnel itself, pre-call processes, sales team approach, sales team skill level, etc., etc. The point I'm trying to make is that if you have success with paid ads, it's not just because of your media buyer, your marketer. And if you fail with paid ads, it's not just because of your media buyer or your marketer. It's always like a two-way street. So it's important to understand that having success with paid ads is so much more than like having one perfect creative or having a perfect campaign structure. It's like a holistic approach where everything has to be working at least at like a 7 or an 8 out of 10 to actually see success. So next step number 5 is creating direct response ads that convert. So one of the biggest variables that will determine your success with paid is the ability to create direct response ads that attract well-framed and financially qualified leads into your funnel. So messaging, aka the actual words being said in your ads, is quite literally make or break. And it can also be like a very fine line in terms of what attracts terrible leads versus amazing leads if you don't know what you're doing. So with that being said, you need to be testing dozens of ads every month and continually testing new front-end messaging. And the good news is, because of AI, this has never been easier. So let's break down exactly how you can do it and how we manage to crank out, I'm not even kidding, hundreds of ads per week across all of our offers. So you guys have heard me talk about this tool a lot, but Poppy AI is an absolute game changer when it comes to creating direct response ads. So essentially the way that Poppy works at a high level, I've talked about it a bunch, but essentially what you do is this box right here is just the AI chat. And it has a bunch of LLMs that it can run off of. So typically, like I'm just using Claude. But the really cool thing about Poppy is kind of the way it works visually. So you can attach a bunch of context. So what I'll do, for example, when I'm writing a new batch of ads for a client, is I'll attach like a bunch of their YouTube videos, VSL script, emails, like past ads that I've written for other clients, et cetera, et cetera. And it makes it a lot easier to just get high quality output when you're feeding it all of this context. So Poppy is one of those things that I'm using quite literally on a daily basis just to refine ads. Obviously, a lot of them still need to be touched up manually, but it's just really good for clients that are testing a lot of ads per week just to actually be able to keep up with it. Just because if I was writing hundreds of ads per week manually, like that would be all I have time to do in the day. So step number 6 is kind of just like some quick best practices to boost your odds of quick success. So the first thing to mention is financial modeling, just because with ads, like it's quite literally all in numbers. It's just dollars in versus dollars out. And a lot of people are obsessed on like just a couple of metrics. They're like, oh, my ROAS sucks, or oh, my cost per call sucks, but they don't actually understand the full picture. So it's really important to do like a full funnel financial model in terms of like everything on the Facebook side, all the way down to the sales team side, and just kind of understanding why numbers are falling the way they are. So with all of our clients that we run paid ads for, we're reviewing this on like a weekly basis, just because it's kind of counterintuitive to go and like obsess over this data unless you're spending like tens of thousands of dollars a day, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars a day, because Facebook ads are just naturally volatile and you're going to have fluctuations that are just completely random, and that's just the way that Facebook works. But it's really important to keep a pulse on your numbers on like a week to week basis, just because that's when you understand like where your numbers are going, what's breaking in your funnel, et cetera, and that's how you get it from having a bunch of dumpster fires on a regular basis. You need to stay on top of your numbers and you need to have a really good good pulse on everything that's going on in the business. And the way to do this is through understanding the numbers. So the next thing that's kind of related to this is understanding your KPIs at each step of the funnel and being cutthroat about monitoring and maintaining KPIs. So first, like, I just kind of want to run through these KPIs. Like, obviously they're a bit general, and you need to kind of go through the process of understanding these numbers for your business and understanding where you stand currently. But like, for example, CPMs, they're obviously going to vary, but what we see on most of our B2C offers is like $30 to $50 is tolerable. We want to have like above a 1% click-through rate. Obviously, none of these numbers are like end all be all. Like, oh, if you have a 0.88 click rate, but your ad is at a 5x ROAS somehow, like, don't turn it off. What I'm saying is, like, you just have to understand like kind of baseline. You want the messaging to actually be aligned with your ideal ICP, and you're not artificially inflating your numbers with like clickbaity stuff. So like, at the time I'm doing this, a lot of people are running VO3 ads, and I think when used tastefully, they really can be like a good tool to have in your arsenal. But if you just run VO3 ads of like a really hot girl like jumping out of, you know, the Grand Canyon, and your offer is like how to do bookkeeping, like, if you don't have the messaging dialed in properly, you're going to get really cheap calls, but they're also not going to be like quality leads whatsoever. So what I would say is like stuff like VO3 and Sora like literally just came out at the time that I'm recording this. And what I'd say is like, I'm definitely looking into how to use these tools, but you have to use them tastefully. And the point being is, you don't just want to artificially inflate like your click-through rate by having some like crazy ad that has a bunch of clickbaity stuff, but it doesn't actually attract like serious prospects. Next thing, these are like your within funnel metrics. So what I would say is like, we shoot for around 3 to 5% of people who hit our page are actually going and filling out the application. They're qualified and they're booking a call. So what I'd say is like, okay, if we have 100 people land on the page in a day, we should have like 3 qualified calls, give or take. You want the VSL engagement rate to be around 25%. Again, this isn't like make or break number. It's just like a good rule. No major application drop off. So you don't want to see like 50% of people leaving at one question or 70% of people leaving at one question. You want everything to be kind of minimal and consistent throughout the application. The main thing here is obviously just cost per call. Like, all of these numbers combined with these numbers are what's going to make up the cost per call. So what I would say is like, you want to just really focus on that and then understand like the sub metrics that make up your cost per call. And what I would say is like, you want to also just model out like, is a $350 call profitable for your business? Is a $180 call profitable for your business? And just understand like the best case scenario, the worst case scenario, and like a moderate case scenario for your business specifically. Next thing are kind of like the sales process numbers. So we want to see that like 70 to 80% of calls booked are not being canceled. So they're actually qualified. Something like Leadify helps with that a lot, and the leads are actually responsive. Next number is around a 40 to 50% show rate on remaining calls. So like, let's say you have 100 calls, you cancel 20 of them, so you have 80 left over. We want to see at least like 30 to 40 of those show up. And overall, this is like more of a qualitative thing, but you just want to see that the leads are like bought in, they're higher intent, they understand the business model. Like, obviously they still have objections, they still have questions, etc., but they at least understand like what's going on. And then in terms of the sales team stats, we want to see around like a 25 to 30% close rate. We want to see like a high cash per call. So what I'd say rule of thumb is just like 70 to 80% of the PIF price. Like, you don't want to be getting like a 50% close rate, but like everything's like 4 pays and 5 pays. We want to see a high cash per call. And then ideally we're aiming to liquidate around 25 to 30% of ad spend from downsells. So like, if you're spending 100K a month, we want to see like 20 to 30K a month coming just from downsells and other offers, because that just gives you a lot of stability, a lot of margin for error, and also just like more margin to bid when ad costs go up. Okay, so now that we've gone through the KPIs, next best practice is just to maintain congruency throughout the entire customer journey. So I like using this example because I know they do really well on paid traffic, and their messaging is a big reason why. So again, like I said earlier, when you're first starting out, you're at a disadvantage because of a lack of context and data around your offer. So you need to make up for it and kind of front load your success by putting in a lot of work on the messaging side and just really dialing it in. So even if you have a decent personal brand, you almost want to act like you don't, and you want the messaging to be so precise and dialed in that people would buy from you even if they had no idea who you were prior. So like, this is a really big test for a lot of people who are big on organic, is like, can you actually convert cold customers? Like, even though you have a big personal brand, can you actually build an infrastructure that is so dialed in terms of messaging that people will buy from you even if they have no idea who you are? So like, if you go through their funnel, all of this company's ads are only speaking to high net worth men. Like, I've seen they're explicitly calling out guys who make over 150K a year. They'll have things like #1 coaching company in the world for high net worth men. I've seen things on the landing page with like, if you make less than 150K a year, like, please leave this page. And there's a few reasons why they're doing that. One, it's because like a part of their brand, like at this point, like people probably know him as the like, oh, you're the guy who, you know, helps people who make over 150K a year. And obviously when you think about that, that's a really good person to be known as, because you are like almost branding yourself as the person who coaches high net worth people. Next thing is obviously like pixel conditioning. So if they can really control who's coming through their funnel, it's going to help with their pixel conditioning a lot. And then also the other thing is they've probably just realized that like, okay, at a certain point, like maybe they weren't so specific on the 150K a year thing in the beginning, but then they realize like, okay, 90% of our revenue or whatever the percentage is coming from high net worth men. Let's just only sell to those people. And obviously that just gives you a way higher LTV, makes your sales process a lot easier when you know that everyone coming through your funnel can afford your program. It's just a matter of getting them over the line, et cetera, et cetera. So all their ads, landing pages, VSLs, thank you pages. I didn't go through their funnel and like funnel hack them, but I'm assuming all of it speaks to only their ICP. So this is what congruency looks like, hence why they crush cold traffic. So like obviously you don't have to sell to such a narrow specific group of people, but if you can sell to a more financially qualified demographic, like we said in the very beginning, it's obviously going to help your odds with paid traffic. But what I'd say is like, even if you're not selling to a specific customer, you still have to know your customer really specifically, if that makes sense. So what I'd say is like, you can have a few different archetypes of people that you're testing and your messaging kind of is in the middle of those people. But it makes it a lot easier to sell to people when you know who you're selling to, if that makes sense. It's one of those things where it's like if you're trying to speak to everyone, you end up speaking to nobody. So the next thing is monitoring sales team efficiency and standards. So you can do everything perfectly on the front end and still get terrible results if your sales team isn't in check. So obviously I'm not a sales manager. I'm not claiming to be a sales expert, but I do work with salespeople every day. So here's just a few things I would say. You have to set expectations with the sales team up front about learning curve on these leads. So you just have to let them know, like, look, this is going to be a gradual process. This is something that we really need to get down in terms of like making your income more stable. We can pack out your calendars every day once we get this to work, but I just need you to be really responsive. I need you to be really patient. I need you to kind of just give me your best effort. Next thing is speed to lead. So every single person who applies, whether they're qualified or unqualified, should be getting called and texted within 10 minutes, non-negotiable. Even 5 minutes is ideal. You need to quality check everything on the sales team side. Either you're doing this or your sales manager is doing this, but everything from pre-call text, automation, setter scripts, like dialers, the scripts that they're using, et cetera, et cetera. What I'd say is like, just because the sales team is so reliant on like humans, there's always going to be a lot of human error. So you need to do your best to keep this in check and just have someone who's managing and owns that entire process. And the last thing is when we launch a new team, like I'm getting excessive amounts of feedback from the sales team, so I know what to change on the front end. So with that being said, you might have to actually train your salespeople on your team how to give helpful feedback. So like saying that these leads are unqualified is not very helpful. You have to tell me why they're not qualified. Is it strictly financial, or are they not buying on the business model, or like do they have these misconceptions, et cetera, et cetera. So it's one of those things where it's like having really good feedback from sales reps can be extremely helpful, but having really bad feedback from sales reps basically does nothing for you. So you need to almost train your sales reps about how to give proper feedback. Okay, so the next principle to understand is that little tweaks at scale make a big difference, especially with the leverage of paid traffic. And what I mean by this is, if your paid ads infrastructure, what I mean by that is like essentially the funnel and the customer journey is operating at like an 80% efficiency when you're spending 20K a month. When you are spending 100K a month and it's still operating at 80%, you're leaving a lot of money on the table. So what I mean by this is it's a lot easier to kind of clean up all of your efforts before you scale rather than to like scale the mess. And then you're making really expensive mistakes when you're spending more on ads. So things like getting your show rate up, getting the number of PIFs and cash collected per close up, having a variety of financing options, cleaning up 20 to 30% of ad spend with downsells, testing new landing pages, testing new application structures, et cetera, et cetera. They might all be marginal tweaks alone. So what I mean by this is like this might add a few percent to your bottom line. This might add a few percent to your bottom line, but compounded on top of each other, these make a massive difference at scale. So again, if you're launching paid for your offer from the first time, you need to do literally everything within your control to stack the deck in your favor. So you have to go into launching paid ads with almost like a pessimistic mindset. It's like, okay, it might take 30 days, 60 days for me to get to the point where I'm like decently profitable. But at the same time, you want to be really aggressive with your effort and do everything within your power to make it work quicker. So that way you get to that point where you're scaling fast quicker. And then the sixth thing kind of just ties right back into that. It's essentially just like rigging the deck in your favor. So the way I think about this is like, okay, let's say if you launched your paid ads with zero effort whatsoever, like you just threw up a random ad, random landing page, you didn't pay attention to anything, your sales team sucked, whatever, you would be at like a 0.2 or like a 0.3 ROAS probably, like maybe like 0.5 if you're lucky. What I mean by this is that's like the base case. That's like your kind of baseline if you had no intelligence and no effort whatsoever. And to get to the point where you are doing like quite literally 10x that output, like instead of at a 0.3x, you're at a 3.0 or you're at a 4.0, you need to essentially like have force multipliers pushing your way instead of the other way. Like this is option number one, this is option number two. You need to be using your force as much as possible to push you towards this. And what I mean by this is when you start, your odds of being in a really bad spot are basically just the same as your odds of being in a really good spot. And what you need to do is you need to essentially just rig the deck in your favor so you can keep pushing yourself towards this end goal. So things like thinking about liquidating ad spend, having a hungry and scrappy sales team, and using, financing and using tools like LeadFi are one of the best ways to rig the deck in your favor and essentially buy back control and kind of just skew the odds of success back in your favor. So what LeadFi does is as soon as you pull name, email, phone number on any of your leads, whether it's a webinar funnel, DM funnel, call funnel, whatever, it will zap into your CRM within just a minute or two their exact buying power. So I won't go into extensive depth about what metrics that entails, but it's pretty crazy when you can put up a batch of ads. Like let's say I launched a call funnel tonight at midnight, I threw up a new campaign. Tomorrow morning when I wake up, I can not only see how many calls I booked, I can see the exact buying power of each of those leads. So that way I can make really quick decisions as to like, okay, this is the kind of audience that I'm looking to reach, let me scale, or this isn't the kind of audience that I'm looking to reach, let me just take a breather, wait for it to play out, or let me pull back the spend. And with that being said, like not only on the media buying side, but also on the sales team side, because now there's no more pointing the finger between marketing and sales like, oh, these leads are unqualified. No, they're actually not. I can see their buying power. Or the marketer pointing the finger at the sales team like, oh, these leads are qualified. The point I'm trying to make is like, everything without LeadFi is just on hearsay. It's like, oh, this lead said they're qualified on the type form and they sounded qualified on the call, but then the closer says they're not qualified. And we're like, shit, like I guess we're just trusting the closer. Whereas if you have something like LeadFi and you have hard data, you can tell is the bottleneck in sales, is the bottleneck in marketing, and there's a bunch of other use cases for LeadFi. I'm not going to make this like a full-blown thing, but they are like technically an agency client of mine, and I work with them very closely. So if you're interested in learning more about LeadFi, you can go ahead and DM me on Instagram. Just put the word LeadFi somewhere in the message, and I'll be sure to connect you with Douglas and the team personally. But I have nothing but good things to say about LeadFi. I literally make it a requirement for all of my teams to use just because it makes my life so much easier. And even before we started working together, like I was a raving fan of the product, so I highly recommend it. So yeah, guys, that brings us to the end of phase one, getting prepared to launch your paid ads. So I'll see you in phase two. All right, welcome back, guys. Now we are in phase two of the Info Products Paid Ads Free course. So in phase number two, we are going to be talking about a very important time in your journey of running paid ads for your info product or for your clients' info products, which is the time from when you launch until you start seeing proof of concept. So what I'm going to say is that this is where the majority of people quit. I've talked to so many people who are like, oh yeah, I tried running ads. It just didn't work. I'm like, oh, well, how long did you try it for? And they're like, oh, 2 weeks. And how much did you spend? Oh, I spent $5,000. And how many ads did you test? Oh, I tested 3 ads. Like, it's because they dropped off in this period of time, and people drop off like flies in this period of time. But what I would say is that if you can make it through this period of time, you put yourself in a way better position to succeed. So let's talk about what exactly that means. So in phase number one, we talked about getting prepared to launch and kind of everything you need to know pre-launch. But now let's actually go into Ads Manager and turn on the ads. I'm not actually going to do that in this video, but I want to talk about how you actually start and launch. So again, please take this with a grain of salt just because there's nuance for every situation. Like if you're an offer that's already doing $500K a month and I started working with you, I'd maybe start a little differently than this, but like in general, if I were to give general advice, this is how I would start. So when I first start with paid ads, like I said in the last phase, I like to have 2 to 3 different messaging angles with 10 ads within each group. I want to have all those creatives ready to go on ice just so that way when I launch, I actually have all the ammo I need. But when it comes to actually launching, I'm going to start with the CBO. I'm going to put that CBO up at around a $700 to $1,000 a day budget. I'm going to have 3 ad sets within that CBO. I'm going to test warm or an interest stack. I'm going to test a lookalike stack and a broad stack. So what this means is if you have like a warm audience, like if you have a big Instagram, I can pull off the engagers, I'm going to do that. Or if you have like an email list, I'm going to pull that. If you have interest stacks, like for example, if it was an Amazon offer, maybe I would test like e-commerce, Shopify, like entrepreneurship, all these different things in an interest stack. That would be one ad set. The next ad set would be a lookalike. Or maybe I'm going to pull a lookalike of all the qualified sales calls that you've had show up in the past 6 months, something like that. And then the third ad set is just going to be a broad ad set. Typically, I'll just do like male, female, and I'll kind of bake it down into one age range. So if the majority of the people that you close on your offer are like 25 to 40, I'm just going to target 25 to 40 year olds. And within those 3 ad sets, I'm going to have the same 8 to 10 creatives with 5 combinations of body copy, headlines, etc. So what this means is like I'm going to take the one group of creatives, like let's say for example it's like the 9 to 5 interest, for example, and I'm going to test all of the same ads with 3 different ad sets. So the creatives in this case are going to be the control variable, and then I'm going to put all of the combinations of body copy, headlines, etc. that Facebook Dynamic Creative allows you to do, and I'm going to launch it. And then on top of that, I'm going to launch Hammer Them Ads. So it's basically just everyone who like hits the application or actually books a call with us. They're going to get retargeted with a bunch of content, and we can get into that into another video. And the entire Hammer Them strategy, of course, is from Jeremy Haynes. So if you want more information about that, go ahead and check out his channel. You probably have already seen that. But either way, once you launch, what do? Because it's like, this is one of the hardest parts, is just being patient when you're launching. Like when you launch, you really should not be doing anything for at least a few days besides like talking to the sales team, fixing stuff within the infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera. Like you kind of just want to like take a little hands-off approach, take a breather, and just like chill out. Don't try and start making 100 different changes within Ads Manager as soon as you launch. So when it comes to once I launch, what am I doing? So I'm kind of just like keeping an eye on things from a distance. Here's what I'm monitoring in order. So I kind of made like a little hierarchy. So the first thing I'm monitoring is like front end metrics. So it's just like CPMs, click-through rates, cost per call, etc. Like all the stuff within Facebook, I'm just keeping an eye on that at first. Next thing is going to be like stuff on the landing page. So it's going to be like the percentage of people who hit the page to how many of those actually are qualified to book a call. Like I said, cost per call, application quality. Another big like qualitative thing that I'm going to be focusing on is just like the setter feedback and the lead quality. So like setter feedback, just like, hey, are the majority of leads that come through the funnel, like are they responding to you? Are they well framed? Like, do they understand what's going on? Or are they like drunk? Whatever it may be in terms of feedback. I've definitely had setter feedback all over the spectrum. Like, oh yeah, this guy's a convicted felon and like he just got out of jail like 3 days ago and he booked a call. Obviously isn't great. Setter feedback. Also, I've had setter feedback where it's like, oh yeah, this guy's been following the creator for like 3 years. He just finally booked a call. I'm more so looking for stuff on that side of the spectrum. When it comes to lead quality, I'm just going to keep plugging Leadfi because it honestly is so important throughout the entire process. But like it helps so much with lead quality just in terms of me launching. And for the first time, when we're putting paid ads up for an offer and I can see like the exact buying power of all the leads coming through the funnel, it just gives me so much like peace of mind and kind of like affirmation that we're going in the right direction. Next thing I'm gonna be looking at is like the show rate. So this is a common Achilles heel. Again, I'm not gonna get like too pressed about the show rate in the beginning just because the sales team is kind of working out the kinks. Like, you know, we might be perfecting a couple things in the pre-call process, but I don't want it to be like 20%. Like I want it to be like bare minimum 30%. We can kind of work up from there. And then close rate, same kind of rationale. Like it's not gonna be perfect on day one, but I wanna see that we're closing at least like 20%, like whether it's paid in fulls, half pays, etc. Like I'm a lot more laid back with things when we get started just because like I'm a lot more patient with things when we get started just because I understand that everything is a process, but like at the same time I'm doing everything within my power to kind of get this iteration process going and get things working in our favor quicker. But you just have to have kind of like realistic expectations when you first launch. And then after all of that is ROAS. So like a lot of people will like launch paid ads and then like they'll go like 15 days and they'll be like, dude, my ROAS sucks. And it's like, okay, well, why does your ROAS suck? Like what's breaking in this entire hierarchy? What's lacking here that's leading to a bad ROAS? So you have to understand like ROAS is a lagging indicator and it's the result of all of these metrics compounded on top of each other. It's like, obviously your ROAS is kind of like the end all be all, but you have to understand like why your ROAS is what it is, if that makes sense. So as long as the front end stats are tolerable and the lead quality is at least decent, like I'm letting things run for at least 5 to 7 days minimum before I'm touching anything. And like really it's probably closer to like 7 to 10, if not 14 days, as long as things are going like okay. Like at the time that I'm launching this, it's, you know, we just launched a team a few days ago. And so like I'm literally in this process right now and all I'm doing for that client is like I'm just talking to the sales reps. I'm just making sure that like these leads like have a pulse and our cost per call isn't terrible. But like beyond that, I'm kind of just like watching from afar. You have to let Facebook do its thing. You have to kind of understand that you're in a process of buying data and really you want everyone on the same page with that. Like you want the offer owner on the same page. You want everyone involved with the offer on the same page. Like, look, like maybe not the sales reps. You want the sales reps kind of like handling every call like it's their last. But in terms of like having a realistic perspective on things. Like, you're not just going to launch paid ads and like immediately be profitable and like immediately have like a bunch of different levers that you have to pull. It's more of like a patience thing in the beginning, and then eventually you work up to the point where you're spending $1,000 a day, $2,000 a day, $5,000 a day. It's all gradual. But in the beginning, it's honestly kind of hard just to stay patient, because like, you know, you want to have like that quick instant gratification, like, oh yeah, like immediately pips coming through. Usually not the way it goes, especially when you're launching for the first time. Obviously, we have had offers where like literally the first week, like we're already super profitable and we're already running. But that's typically when you already have like a creator who's pretty big on organic. So the reason why I'm very like patient when it comes to launching and kind of like my decision making when we launch is two things. One, it's like having a minimum frequency. So what I mean by this is like, if you're launching paid for the first time and your creator doesn't have a massive organic following, like for a lot of people, this is the first time they've ever seen this person. And it's just like, a lot of people are not going to take action on that first touch point. Like, they're not just going to see an ad for the first time, go through the funnel, book a call. I mean, obviously some people will do that, but the majority of people need to be warmed up a little bit more. They need to see different ads that speak to them in different ways and hit different angles, etc. So that's one reason. Next thing is the idea of like just having a look back window. So like, for example, it's October when I'm filming this. If the client that I just launched, so like for example, the client that I just launched, like we've already got calls coming through. I'm sure we'll be getting closes in the next day or so. But the whole idea is like, okay, even if we go all of October and let's say we spend 50 grand and we bring back 100, that might not be like super exciting on the front end, but it's like, it's this snowball effect. I'm going to get to this in the next phase. But you spend 50 the first month, you bring back 100. And then the next month you spend 70 and you bring back 200. And then the next month you spend 100 and you bring back 350. And it's like this compounding thing, because it kind of relates to the first principle, where it's like the more and more people that you have in your ecosystem, the more and more kind of like revenue potential you have as you go on. I'm going to get into this in the next phase. But it's just the whole idea of like a look back window. So it's like, okay, the money that I spent in October, I did a 2-to-1 on when I look on October 31st. But if I go back in Hyros and I look in December, all the people who came through my October ads, but they purchased in, you know, November, December, like maybe my ROAS is a 4-to-1 or a 5-to-1, and you're just compounding this over time. So when it comes to next steps after I launch, it's really just like a few scenarios. So the first scenario is it works and you just double down. So when it comes to doubling down, again, everyone has a different style of media buying, and I can make different recommendations depending on the situation. But either way, like if you want to double down, you could just scale that initial CBO. You could break out the winning creators into an ABO, or you can just launch new creators and just scale horizontally. So the scenario where you would double down is like you have good front end statistics, the lead quality is on par, if not really good, and even if the ROAS isn't ideal, like I said, this is more of a lagging indicator of success. As long as everything looks solid, you scale, in my opinion and in my experience. Like, you don't want to just stay at that $700 to $1,000 range forever and just wait till you magically get super profitable. Like, you need to kind of build the momentum. Or if things don't work, you're going to land in really one of three scenarios usually. When it comes to pivoting, either you're going to pivot to completely new creatives, which is just like new messaging, new ad style, etc., which is like why I said I like to have a bunch of ads on ice just ready to go. Next pivot you can make is just new targeting. I would say this usually isn't as big of a lever, especially if you launch the way that I launched in the beginning of this phase. Or the third scenario is you have some optimizations to make within the funnel. So you might be optimizing the VSL or the landing page or the application or like the pre-call process, all that kind of stuff. I would say that that's probably the most common scenario here, is that like you're usually making changes to the infrastructure to kind of get the overall results better. Just that's like given you understand messaging really well and the front end messaging in the first batch of ads is really good. So like, for example, that team that I just said in this video that I'm launching, like if I'm going back and making changes, I know that the messaging in the first batch of ads is pretty solid. So the tweaks that I'm going to be making first are probably going to be to like the landing page and the application and the pre-call process, et cetera, et cetera. So those are just like some kind of cookie cutter examples of what could happen when you launch. Obviously, it really is in your best interest to have a media buyer or a marketer that has kind of like been there, done that, so that way they can, you know, make the right decision for you. But if I were to give you kind of just like high level advice, that's what I would say. So again, like I said, just take it with a grain of salt because everyone's situation is so different, but I'm just doing my best to try and give you some like general rules to follow. So step number 2 is kind of just adjusting your expectations. Like I said at the beginning of this phase, so many people quit in this period of the first day that they're launching till when they actually see proof of concept and any kind of traction with paid ads. And let's talk about why. So I like to call this like the little valley of despair when it comes to launching paid ads. And I would say it usually lasts anywhere from like 30 to 90 days, depending on how good your team is, how good your marketers are, et cetera, et cetera. But once you make it through that, it is a lot easier to just start seeing momentum. So let's talk about why most people quit in this valley of despair. It really boils down to a lack of context. You don't understand what it takes to see success with paid ads yet when it comes to all the messaging, everything in the funnel, everything on the sales team side. Like the entire equation is almost just like an unknown, and you've never really proven to yourself that you can be profitable with paid ads yet until obviously you do it with one client, and then it's just a matter, like for me at this point, like I understand that everything is just an iteration cycle, and because we've helped so many offers scale with paid ads, I just understand like, okay, I'm starting over with another client. It's 30 days, 60 days, 90 days until we get to the point where we want to be. But it comes down to a lack of context around what messaging works for your offer, what actually attracts financially qualified leads that your sales team is consistently closing. So there's a few different variables in there. It's like front-end messaging, it's what actually attracts financially qualified people, and then also what your sales team is capable of closing. Like with some of the offers that we work with, like yes, we can attract like a 50-year-old lead that has a bunch of money, but it's just not really going to be the easiest time for our sales team. So we go for like the 30-year-olds that have money, or like the 25-year-olds that have money, et cetera, et cetera. Lack of pixel conditioning and data. We talked about that a little bit earlier, but that's just like a natural process that you're gonna have to go through in terms of conditioning your pixel properly and just buying back relevant data. And like I said in the last phase, most people don't buy on first touch point. They need to be warmed up, so they need to see your ads multiple times. And also just the natural sales cycle of high ticket info products. Like for a lot of people, like a $5,000 coaching program is probably like the biggest purchase they're going to make all year. So you just have to remember that like this isn't like an e-com product where it's going to be like a 5-minute impulse buy where like they see an ad and they just buy. Info product sales cycles are a lot different, so you have to adjust your expectations to align with that. So what that means is like e-com people are very impatient. It's like you launch ads, you're looking for proof of concept day one. Whereas like with info, you have to be a lot more patient in terms of like it's a lot longer game, have a lot longer expectation in terms of how long it's going to take. But when it comes to info, it's a lot longer sales cycle, so you just have to adjust your expectations accordingly. So the first thing you have to do when it comes to like your KPIs is you're going to have to iterate to the point where all these are even like tolerable. So like you might come out and your cost per call might be like $500. And you just have to figure out how to get it down to like 200. Your show rate might be like 20, 30%. You have to figure out how to get it up to like 40%. Your close rate might be like 20%. You have to figure out how to get it into like the 30s. What I'm trying to say is like in the beginning, it might just be this game of like getting it just to the point where it's like profitable. And then from there, it's like getting it to the point where it's at a 2x. And then it's like getting out of the valley of despair and getting it to the point where like you have the ability to spend more, which means you're testing more ads, which means you're hitting everyone in your ecosystem more frequently. And it's just like this gradual process of like breaking out of this valley and slowly but surely like getting up this curve. So again, these numbers like $200 to $300 cost per call, 40% show rate, like 20 to 30% close rate. These aren't where you want to be long term, but if you can manage to get into this range, depending on your AOV, these numbers should at least make the numbers work to the point where you're profitable. But then it turns into iterating on each one of these respectively until they're in like a healthy profit KPI range. So you would have to go back to your financial models and figure out like, okay, my best case scenario is what? Like $180 cost per call. And my show rate is like a 50% show rate. And my close rate is like a 35% close rate. And my cash per call is X. And it turns into a game of kind of like attacking each one of those KPIs respectively until they're at like your best case scenario. So really like at a high level, the entire game of like seeing proof of concept with your paid ads just turns into choosing the best funnel to scale into, which we talked about in phase one, building all the infrastructure properly and iterating it until it's all within KPI. So that's like phase one and phase two, making sure that the lead quality is good enough on the front end, making sure the back-end statistics are in check, so like everything with your sales team, making sure that the show rate doesn't plummet, the close rate doesn't plummet, etc. Continue iterating on the front end to get costs as low as possible while still maintaining good lead quality. So I'm going to dive into that a little bit. So essentially, like, let's say you get to the point where your ads are going decently, and it's like, you know, you're at like a 2-to-1 ROAS, 2.5 to 1, and the infrastructure is all decent. Like, you check every point of the funnel. It's like, okay, you know, my CPMs are decent, click-through rates are decent, my percentage of people who land on the page to booking a call and are qualified is decent. Like, the VSL is being, you know, consumed at a good rate, show rate's good, close rate's good, etc. And if you can keep all of that within KPI, usually the highest leverage thing is just trying to get your front end cost down. So like getting from like a $200 call to like a $140 call, and then bringing everything up within the funnel marginally. So it's like, okay, if I can get my cost per call down like 20%, and I can get my show rate up 5%, I can get my close rate up 3%, I can get my cash per call up 10%, and I can get, you kind of get the point I'm getting at, but it's like, usually the focus for us is getting the front end cost down and then just marginally pulling everything up, because it's like, you're probably not going to get your show rate up from like 40% to 80%. And you're probably not going to get your close rate up from 30% to 60%, but it's just marginal gains across the board over time. Like, it's just like the tortoise and the hare. Like, you just got to do a little bit. You got to do a little bit week on week, and you'll get to the point where it's consistently more and more profitable. And then obviously while you're doing that, you just need to keep your eyes on all your statistics within the funnel and all your back-end statistics and get them back into KPI when needed. So what I mean by that is, like, just because you have a 50% show rate or a 60% show rate one week doesn't mean it's going to stay there forever. There might be little things that pop up where it's like, oh, we have to do this to get our show rate back up, or we have to, implement this into our process, et cetera, et cetera. So it's kind of just this game of like, first you're kind of like holding everything together, and then it becomes a game of like, okay, things are starting to stabilize out. I want to test on the front end. Just keep your eye on everything else within funnel and just marginally lift these stats up. So again, I know this all sounds easier said than done, but really you have to understand like what you're getting yourself into. And if I'm being honest with you, like it's not rocket science. Like I said, at this point, like we've helped so many offers scale with paid to the point where it's like I can kind of know initially, like on a sales call, is this something I even want to get involved in? If it's something I think I have potential with, like, and I'm confident in the offer, like I know it's literally just a matter of time. It's just a matter of iterating and get everything built out properly, testing on the front end, making sure everything works in the sales process, et cetera, et cetera. It's not rocket science. It's just like the first time you're doing it, it's definitely the hardest. And then from there, it gets easier and easier. So for step number 3, I just want to give like an end-to-end checklist of kind of like you just checking the boxes manually to make sure that there's no massive like thing that's just screwing your chances of being profitable over. So step number 1 is like offer positioning. Obviously we talked about this in phase 1. Number 2 is the front end messaging. So just, is the messaging aligned to where it's going to attract someone that's actually financially qualified, or are you just preaching like this is the easiest and simplest, most brain dead way to make 10K a month, even if you have no money, no experience, no brain cells? Like, that's not going to attract your ideal prospect, more than likely. Step number 3 is like the landing page. So, just making sure that your headline is congruent with that ICP that you're driving in step number 2, and that you're split testing all these things, like just trying to get your CRO up here and there, VSL, application, et cetera. We already kind of talked about like how to kind of just maximize your performance on those fronts. Confirmation page. So like we talked about phase 1, just making sure that that's being consumed properly, figuring out like kind of what you can take from the sales team's feedback and work back into confirmation page and even front end stuff. So like, for example, if, let's say you've been running paid for like a couple months and you constantly are just getting people who like have the same misconception, have the same objection, like go and take that, turn it into an FAQ video and put it on the confirmation page, and maybe work it into the Hammer Them ads, and maybe even work it into the VSL. It's just like this game of like just gradually making things better week over week, month over month. And then the pre-call process. So again, like I said, like we have best practices for show rate. Close rate usually comes down to like the sales manager and just how well the salespeople are being kind of held to their standards, and just things like cash per call, like getting all your financing options in place, et cetera, et cetera. And then obviously just the sales team is kind of like a control variable, just because I'm assuming you're not changing closers all the time and changing setters all the time. So like your sales team can kind of be a control variable. Like obviously they're going to have good weeks, good months, bad months, et cetera. But they should ideally be within the same kind of ballpark, and they should be getting better month over month and getting more comfortable. But again, Leadify helps a ton here because you have real data. So like, for example, front end messaging and everything that comes down to the sales team, like this is where Leadify really comes into play, because I'm able to see like, okay, are the leads coming through our funnel? Like, are they just really like financially unqualified leads? If yes, okay, I need to go back to step number 2 and kind of change the front end messaging. Or if like I go through a bunch of iterations of that and I still can't get it to where I have a bunch of financially qualified people coming through, maybe I even need to go back to step number 1 and change the offer positioning a little bit. Or I can figure out like, okay, these people coming through the funnel are financially qualified. It's just my sales team isn't closing them. So then I can actually figure out like where the bottlenecks are. Like, okay, is it just, we're not like our close rate just isn't where it needs to be, or just like our cash per call isn't where it needs to be, et cetera, et cetera. But it just gives you a lot of clarity when it comes to ads. I would say it's like at this point, for me personally, it's like a non-negotiable when it comes to running paid ads for a client. Like I need them to have lead find. Okay, so step number 4 when it comes to seeing proof of concept with your paid ads is just to launch more ads. So if you're 100% sure that everything we talked about in this checklist is done at least decently and ideally like really well, and your front end numbers are decent, lead quality is decent, everyone's responsive, et cetera, you just have to understand a few principles. If all of that is kind of in check, you just have to understand a few key principles when it comes to getting to the point where you can actually scale. So this past winter, I learned how to ski. And when I learned how to ski, I understood that it's easier with more momentum. Like when you're going really slow, it's really hard to ski. But as you kind of pick up speed, even though it's scary, it becomes easier to ski. Same thing with running paid ads. The more momentum, aka spend you have, because you're buying data quicker, it essentially just makes it easier to scale. So what I mean by this is when you go from the point where you're spending $500 a day and you're booking 3 to 5 calls a day, which means you have like 1 to 2 live calls a day, which means you have like 10 live calls a week. When you go to the point where you're getting like 10 calls booked a day and like 4 or 5 of those are live, it just gives you more data and you just work through the iteration process quicker. So essentially like that value of despair we were talking about, you can either speed through the value of despair by like picking up more momentum and spending more. Like obviously don't be reckless with it, but like if you see the signs to go, like go, or you can crawl through it and you can just spend $300 or $500 a day for like months when it could just take you weeks to get out of that value of despair. And the next principle I want to talk about is just kind of like a thought model around why you should be launching more ads. So if you were trying to sell a person through organic, would you want them to watch the same video like 10 times? Or would you want them to watch 10 different videos with completely unique messaging that are obviously still all around the same opportunity, but just hitting them from different angles? So obviously, like I think you and I can both agree, I would rather someone watch 10 different videos where I'm articulating the business model differently and I'm pitching it differently, rather than just beating them over the head with the same video 10 times. Same kind of idea when it comes to ads. Like I said, a lot of people will say like, oh yeah, I tried to run ads, but they tried like 3 creatives. And it's like, really? I don't have any ad accounts that have less than like 30 ads running. And like, obviously I'm not launching 30 ads from day one, but like I said, we're trying to like get out of that valley of despair as quick as possible. So like I said, the team that I'm just launching, like we just started launching with 10 ads. Like I followed the same process that I showed you guys above. But my very next step, like once we get to the point which we're at right now, where like we have proof of concept, like we're getting $100, $150 calls, lead quality is decent, like responsiveness is decent. We've already taken a few live calls. Like we've had like the majority of our prospects are responsive, et cetera, et cetera. To me, that's like the signal to like, okay, like push the spend a little bit. And what I'm going to do, like probably today or tomorrow, is just launch another batch of 10 ads because I want to get to that point where we have like 30 to 40 ads running at a time. Because that's really what it takes to scale, especially with these new Facebook updates and all that. Like you need to have a lot of unique creative running. So my end game is to get to the point where I'm spending like $1,000 to $1,500 a day, bare minimum, and have 20 to 30 ads running at a time, just because that's just like building up more momentum in the ad account. And if you're going to commit, like you have to actually commit. This is a big thing that like, if I'm being honest, like a lot of people just are not in the position to run ads yet, like just mentally and like financially, honestly. Like you can't back off after you spend like $5,000 and you've been testing for like 10 days and you ran like 5 different ads. Like you just can't go into it with that mindset. Like if you're going to commit, like you actually have to commit. Like I said, $20,000 to $30,000 is what I recommend over a month's time frame. You need to have all the ads done. You need to have all the infrastructure built out. Like it's a good chunk of work. Like I'm not going to downplay that. Like it's definitely not something that you can just pick up in like a couple days and just launch ads. Like for us, it probably takes 7 to 10 days to launch a new team. Like from the time of the agreement being signed up to the point where we could launch ads, 7 to 10 days is probably the quickest for us. Like realistically, it might be 2 weeks, give or take, when it comes to like hiring the sales team, doing all that. Like I said, throughout this whole video, I've kind of articulated how important it is to hire the right people and have the right people running your marketing. So if you'd like to work with me direct, I'm going to take this time to give you a direct CTA. If you would like to work directly with us or have us consult on your entire paid ads process, you can go ahead and click the link down below and book a call with me personally. But getting back to the point, if you're going to do this, like you have to actually commit and you have to actually kind of like see this through, because like we talked about at the very beginning of phase 1, it is important. Like it is 100% a game changer for your business. If you can crack it, you just have to actually see it through. So step number 5, I just called it staying alive, because when you first launch, it usually goes one of 2 ways. So outcome number 1, and I would say this is usually for people who already have like good organic traction, they've already validated the offer, etc. It basically just hits right away. Like from the beginning, like messaging's dialed in, cost per call is decent, like lead quality is decent, and you kind of just like skip through the hard part, or you get through it like really quick. Or scenario number two, it might feel like you're in this weird like limbo phase. Like I said before, like you might be at the point where like your lead quality is like super spotty, like you're paying like $200 to $300 a call, like your show rate's kind of bad, your close rate's kind of bad, like you're just barely like scraping by when it comes to being profitable. So like the money's leaving your account, like you definitely know that, but you're not getting a ton of volume. The leads you do get are kind of iffy. The feedback from your sales team is iffy. You get a close here and there. But here's the main way to think about this. Ads get easier as you go on because you buy more data, you condition your pixel properly, you have more context for your sales team, your prospects are seeing you more, and there's like this familiarity bias where it's like, oh, I've been seeing his ads for weeks, like maybe I should look into this. And you get to test more and more creative, you have more and more ads running on the account. Whole point being is like it's easier 90 days in than it is on day one. So it's literally all about just building everything right initially, like I gave you in that checklist, tweaking things within the funnel and the sales process as you go to keep them all within KPI, continuing to launch new ads, having your sales team being scrappy and resourceful just to close as much as they can, like liquidate downsells, all that kind of stuff, like it counts at this stage, and overall just staying alive. And when you can finally get out of that value despair with at least a 2x, things get easier, and then you get to the point where you're scaling. So I'm going to talk about scaling paid ads in the next phase, phase number 3. So I'll see you over there. All right, guys, welcome to phase 3 of the free course, which is scaling your paid ads to 10K a day and beyond. So I've done other videos in my channel about scaling paid ads to 10K a day and beyond. The reason why I say 10K a day is because usually if you're spending $300K a month, you should be bringing back right around $1 million a month, which is obviously a big checkpoint for a lot of info businesses. But I want to do my best to kind of just be concise here because at the end of the day, like honestly, a lot of the principles that go into scaling are similar to the principles that we talked about in phase 2. So I'm just going to do my best to not be super redundant and kind of just get into what's different when it comes to reaching that threshold of spend where you go from like a couple $1,000s a day to like $5,000 to $10,000 a day. So principle number 1 is we are going to learn how to categorize data and essentially use that data to diagnose issues. So in phase 1 and phase 2, we talked all about like financially modeling and knowing your KPIs and keeping them within KPI and all that different stuff. But when you get to the point where you're scaling, it's really helpful to be able to like compartmentalize your entire sales process and customer journey so that way you can kind of pinpoint what's going wrong within your approach and understand how to diagnose issues and basically how to respond to those issues. So like on the front end, you have the statistics that are kind of like on Facebook and within funnel. So it's like CPMs, click-through rates, lead quality, etc. Like those are all being driven by whatever's going on in Facebook, whether it's your targeting, ad creative, campaign structure, etc., etc. And then you have your within funnel stats, which is like your application to booking percentage, your VSL retention rate, cost per call, lead quality, etc. And then you have like your back end statistics, which is like your response rate, show rate, close rate, cash per call, what percentage of calls you cancel, etc. And with each of these problems and potential issues that could arise, you're gonna have different responses. So like if your front end stats go out of KPI, the responses could be testing new creatives, new messaging, new targeting. If your within funnel metrics go out of KPI, it could be a new VSL, new offer positioning, new front end messaging again, etc. And if your back end statistics go out of KPI, it could be like a new pre-call process that you're implementing. You're going to quality check your setter and closer scripts, and you're just going to keep reworking the front end. Obviously, this is just all you're doing as a marketer. Your sales manager might have different responses to these numbers. But either way, it's kind of just the entire principle of like understanding that your numbers have other sub-metrics underneath them. So what I mean by this is like you can't only look at cost per call and you can't only look at ROAS. Like you kind of have to understand how everything ebbs and flows together and understand how to attack each of these little metrics respectively. Principle number 2 that I want to get into is creative velocity, just because especially now with these new Facebook updates and just like what we're seeing in our best accounts is like our biggest accounts, we're testing like quite literally over 100 ads at a time. So ads are largely a creative game, and like we've talked about here, the messaging within the ads is so crucial. With that being said, here's basically what the process boils down to. So if I were to break it down to like a general process for you to follow, here's what it would be. So like let's say you launch ads and you test angle A. So if it works, and by works, I mean it attracts a high volume of financially qualified leads that are well framed. So there's a few different parts to that. A high volume, meaning that your cost per call or your cost per result is decent. The leads that they're driving are actually financially qualified, so they're capable of buying your program, and they're well framed. So you're kind of setting expectations right on the front end, like they understand the business, et cetera, et cetera. So ideally you want all 3 of those things from like an ideal lead. So if it works, you double down, and we'll talk about how to do this. you start testing more messaging adjacent to it. So what I mean by that is, like, maybe the hook in the ad that works really well is like, hey, if you don't want to be in the career that you're in long term and you want like a little escape plan, this business model could be that for you. And let's say that's the hook that you test and it works well. So the next hook that you test might be something like really similar to that. You just change the messaging up a little bit, but it's still like the same kind of idea. That's what I mean by like adjacent messaging. It's like taking what's already worked and kind of just iterating on it slightly. And then the next thing you could do is you continue testing completely unique messaging to find the next thing that's going to hit. So like, for example, you could have this verbiage about like getting out of your 9 to 5, but at the same time, the same offer could be positioned as like an investment to someone who's like looking to make an active investment. So it's like, point being is like, when you find something that works, obviously test messaging that's similar to it, but at the same time, you have to be testing messaging that's like completely unique, just because you might have diminishing returns on that one angle after certain points. So it's important to constantly have multiple balls up in the air and essentially like don't just go all in on one angle. You want to be testing other stuff, so that way when that one angle starts experiencing diminishing returns, you have other things that you've been testing and ideally are already starting to catch traction. But of course, there's a scenario where you test angle A and it just doesn't work. So if it doesn't work, you don't just completely abandon that messaging unless it's like actually terrible messaging. Like I gave the example earlier where it's like, if you're looking for the easiest and simplest way to like make 10K a month online, if you have no money and no brain cells, like that's just terrible. Like just don't do that. But if it's messaging that could work and you think that it has potential, you don't just abandon it forever. You kind of just put it on the back burner and you pivot around it and keep testing more adjacent messaging until you find creatives that hit. So like, let's say you test an angle, it doesn't work. Maybe you just change a little bit of the verbiage so that way it sounds like it's being articulated now to a more financially qualified person. Or you change the verbiage a little bit so it's a little bit easier to understand. Like whatever it might be, if you have an angle that doesn't work, but it's like within KPI to an extent, and like the lead quality is okay, but it's just like not really where you want it to be, you have to understand that like a lot of messaging is like a very fine line. Like to me, there's a very fine line between messaging that actually attracts like this kind of scenario and messaging that doesn't. And it's honestly more subtle than you would think a lot of times. And then also, if it doesn't work, you continue testing different styles of ads. So like the composition, the editing, like how does the ad lay out sequence wise? Like does it start with just immediately hook, or do you start with multiple hooks, or do you start with social proof, or do you start with a screenshot? Like there's all different kinds of things that you can test in terms of the actual like making of the ad, if that makes sense. So like there's messaging and then there's actually like what's going on within the ad visually and editing wise. And both of those I would say are important to test. Okay, so I'm going to give you guys a kind of generic breakdown of how I test. Again, everyone has like a different style of media buying. There's no one right way to do it, but this is kind of just like the general process I follow. So like I said, creative velocity, like we're constantly having our creators film new ads, ideally once a week, but for some of them who are more busy, maybe bi-weekly. So let's say the creator films a new batch of ads every week. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to test that batch of ads within a CBO. So Facebook is naturally going to bias the majority of that spend towards one or two creatives in that CBO. So if I upload 10 ads, like 80 or 90% of the spend is going to go on like one or two creatives. So if I let that campaign run for like 10 to 14 days, and the reason why I say 10 to 14 days is because you have to understand like the logistics of launching a new campaign. So like, for example, if I'm launching a new campaign at $1,000 a day and I launch it on the first of the month, realistically calls are going to start getting booked on the first, but the calls are going to occur on like the third or the fourth. And like realistically, you're probably not going to close like the very first people that book in from that ad. So maybe the first close doesn't come in to like the 5th or the 6th. And at that point, by the 5th or the 6th, that campaign has gone into a hole, aka like it's unprofitable by like $5,000 to $6,000. And you kind of get the point here. It's like you have to be a bit more patient with these campaigns just because of the natural sales cycle of info products, and like also the fact that, you know, you don't want to just kill campaigns too early. Like you want to let them run if they have traction in terms of front end statistics. So point I'm trying to make is like after 10 to 14 days, you'll have a decent pulse on whether or not that campaign worked or not. If that campaign is profitable, I'm going to deem the ad or ads that got the most spend within that CBO as like a winning ad. So I'm going to make a note to the client for the next batch that they're going to film to like basically just keep tabs like, okay, this is the creative that's working right now. Let's test some adjacent messaging, and also let's test some completely unique messaging like I just talked about. I might scale that original CBO depending on how profitable it is. And then basically like after that 10 to 14 day window, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull those creatives out of, I'm not going to pull them out of that CBO. I'm going to leave it running, but I'm basically going to keep tabs on the winning ads from that CBO. I'm going to add them into like a proven winner ABO that also gets a portion of spend. So essentially I'm not just putting all of my spend on these CBOs. I also have like a proven winner ABO that's running at the same time, where essentially every time I find a new winning ad, I'm going to add that into that creative. So over time, I just keep having all of these CBOs that are all kind of testing on their own. And then I have this one big proven winner with all of the winning ads with each, and I'm scaling that on its own. And like, obviously, all of these ads have diminishing returns at a certain point. Like some of these CBOs can run for months, some of them run for weeks. Same thing with each of the ads within the ABO, but that's kind of like my general process just to get like stable returns across the ad account. Because obviously like some people will just go like all in on one campaign and they'll just scale like one campaign to like 15K a day. That's just typically not the way I do it. I like to have a bit more stability and kind of mitigate risk across different campaigns. And we're going to talk about stuff like this in the very next step. But essentially, I would rather horizontally scale and have a couple eggs in a few different baskets. And obviously, like if I find a campaign that's like really crushing, I'm going to spend into it. Like I'm going to scale it pretty hard. But in general, like you'll never see an ad account I'm running that just has like one big campaign. I'm usually diversifying spend out across multiple campaigns. So either way, just to get into a super long tangent, you just rinse and repeat that process every week or every 2 weeks until you start to notice diminishing returns. So like I said, some campaigns will die after a few weeks. Some campaigns will die after a few months. And it's just like this game of constantly having new creatives to test. So that way, when your ads start to die out and you start to see ad fatigue, you have new ones to sub in, et cetera, et cetera. And that's kind of the process I follow at a high level. So first, you go full focus into one funnel, like we've talked about throughout this entire video. Get it all within KPI. Make sure it stays there while you get acquisition down as much as possible, like we talked about in phase number 2. And then once you've gotten one funnel to an 8 or 9 out of 10 and you're scaling it, it's time to adopt a multi-funnel approach. So like I just talked about, a lot of my approach about scaling ads is just diversifying risk and essentially just like getting it to where we're seeing good, stable returns, but we're also not going all in on one funnel and all in on one campaign. I would rather, get a 4X across the board and have it be a lot more safe and stable than get like a 5X, but put all my eggs in one basket, if that makes sense. So in terms of giving you like a mental model of the way I think of an ad account is essentially you have X amount of spend per month, say it's 100K a month, and you want to allocate that spend in a way where you're getting the highest return across your portfolio while also diversifying your risk and kind of mitigating your downside. So each campaign is like an investment. And ultimately, the goal is to get the aggregate return of the portfolio as high as possible while minimizing downside risk, like the same way that a hedge fund would operate. Like obviously, they're trying to get the returns as high as possible, but they're not just going and gambling on meme coins because they understand that there's downside as well. So obviously, going all in on one campaign or one funnel isn't as risky as going all in on meme coins, but you get the point I'm trying to make. So this makes for a big argument when it comes to diversifying spend across multiple funnels, and let's talk about why. So here's what you have to realize. Every funnel reaches a point of diminishing returns. It might be at 5K a day in spend. It might be at 10K a day in spend, 15K a day. But like at a certain point, you're going to reach diminishing returns. And at the end of the day, like diminishing returns are still returns. Like as long as you're still profitable, this isn't like a massive concern. But if you're really trying to maximize your returns, you might want to look into scaling to multiple funnels. So if you try and scale past this ceiling or this point where you get diminishing returns, oftentimes you're better off putting spend in other funnels. And as we've talked about before, every audience has a pocket of people that is more or less receptive to certain funnels. So like for example, there's a lot of people who just have too much resistance to like going through a call funnel. They just like don't want to speak to someone on the phone because they feel like they're going to be hard sold and they just like are uncomfortable with it, whatever. But like they would sure as hell like show up to a webinar and like watch from the other side of the laptop and just have like a less pressury kind of environment. Same thing with like a lot of people just don't have the time to show up to a webinar. So they would rather like go through a low ticket to high ticket funnel and just like sample what your company has to offer. And if they think it's helpful, they'll potentially book a call to go into coaching. The entire point is just like, if you have 100,000 people in your audience, let's say, there's going to be like 20,000 people who just don't want to go through your call funnel. And then there's going to want to be like and there's going to be like 20,000 people who just don't want to show up to your webinar. So essentially, like by having different funnels, you essentially just have different entry points for all these people to enter your ecosystem depending on their preferences. And at a certain scale, it doesn't make sense to just have one entry point. It makes sense to have multiple entry points, so that way you build this kind of like vortex of like, you have some people coming in through your high ticket funnel, you have some people coming in through your low ticket funnel, you have some people coming in through your webinars, et cetera, and it just becomes like this big spider web. So let's talk about what this means tangibly. So let's say your ROAS on a call funnel is like a 3-to-1 and you're at 10K a day in spend. But when you try and spend 15K a day, it drops like a 2-to-1. But if you take that 35K a week or 5K a day and spend it on a weekly webinar, you bring back like 140K, which is a 4-to-1. So AKA, you just found a better place to allocate that spend. But when you try to push that spend on a webinar to the point where you're spending like 80K a week, you reach another ceiling on it because of diminishing returns. So you go and allocate the rest of your spend to a low ticket funnel. So the point is, it's safer and usually more beneficial to diversify your spend across different funnels. Like our biggest accounts, we have like 2 to 3 funnels running at a time. And if you can scale with a multi-funnel approach, you're bringing in more leads that will go and convert in other conversion mechanisms, which means more overall scale at a healthier and safer kind of approach. So like I said, you kind of build like this spider web where it's like you have people coming in through your low ticket funnel and they buy the low ticket product, but then they don't book a call right away to go to high ticket, but then they show up to a webinar and they buy on there. Or you have people who come in from your webinar and they don't buy on the webinar, but they see an ad for the call funnel later and they buy it then. Like, you kind of get my point. But it's one of those things where it's like, when you do it properly, it's just like rising tide lifts all ships, because you are taking less risk by diversifying your spend across multiple funnels. You're still getting a really solid aggregate return if each of the funnels are dialed in respectively, but it should lift the performance of all of them together. Again, looking at it like a portfolio. So what this turns into tangibly is just like, you dial in one funnel's infrastructure. So like, let's say you do a webinar, you dial in the whole infrastructure. Like, you build out the landing pages, you test everything to see what gets you the best sign up rate. And then you build out all the pre-webinar processes and you figure out what you need to do to get the highest show rate. And then you build out the webinar deck and you test stuff within the deck to see what gets you the highest conversion rate. You get the process. And then you spend into that funnel until you find like that point of diminishing returns. And again, this isn't going to be so like granular as like, oh, like when I get to 100K a month and spend on this funnel, it just goes like this. It's one of those things where it's like, you kind of track the numbers across the business for a few months. You're like, okay, like this funnel is kind of getting like burnt out, or, you know, we're seeing diminishing returns here. So let's launch another funnel and put some of the spend into that. And then you dial in the next funnel's infrastructure and you just repeat. Okay, so principle number 4 is accounting for sales cycles and look back windows. So I kind of touched on this in the last phase, but essentially like just this principle is important as you scale, because as you scale, your ROAS might drop. But with that being said, you have to kind of see the long game in this, in terms of like, if your ROAS goes from a 5-to-1 to like a 3-to-1, but you're netting more money every single month, like you go from a 5-to-1 on 100K a month where you're taking home 400K profit, but then you get it to a 3-to-1 when you're spending 300K a month, which means you're taking home 600K in profit. You kind of get the point. Like, you're getting a smaller ROAS on a bigger pie, which means more dollars out every month. But some people get really caught up in the whole like, you know, 3x versus 5x logic. But either way, just because your ROAS is at like a 3-to-1 on a 30-day time frame, you leave it running and you continue to optimize just because of look back windows. So it's this whole principle where it's just like, okay, even if your ROAS isn't where you want it to be long term, but you're scaling and you're doing everything you can to kind of like optimize the infrastructure, and there's no real like massive issues, like it's not like, you know, your setter just isn't calling any of your leads or anything like that, like continue to scale just because of this 5th principle that I'm about to get to. But it's just because of look back windows. Like I said before, like if I spent 100K in October and it brought back 300, but I go back and look at those ads in December, maybe I brought back 450 if you look at like first click October ads. And then also you have to account for the sales cycle of a high ticket info product. So like, we have customer journeys all the time, because you can see every single click in Hyros where like someone literally came into our ecosystem like 2 years ago and then bought today. And the whole point being is like, you just have to have a long-term mindset when it comes to scaling, just because like you're playing a long game, and like there's going to be people who come from your ads today that buy in a year, and the only way you're going to make that sale a year from now is if you're still around and if you're still scaling. So point being is just like, be more patient with everything as you scale. And also you can do your part in shortening sales cycles with new conversion mechanisms, retention marketing, etc. So like, if you go from the point where you're just running a call funnel to where you're running like a call funnel, a webinar, and a low ticket funnel, that usually means that you're going to cut your sales process down, just because, like, think about it tangibly. If you're only running a call funnel, someone comes through your call funnel, they don't buy. For them to buy, they're going to have to go back through that call funnel at some point, which probably would happen, for some leads. But if they come through your call funnel, don't buy, but then you have a webinar, you have a low ticket to high ticket, like, it's essentially just building all these new pipelines for more revenue to come in, which is usually better for shortening sales cycles. And then obviously retention marketing is pretty self-explanatory. It's just like doing constant email marketing, pushing to live events, pushing to new offers, et cetera, et cetera. So the takeaway is that, like, ROAS is a lagging indicator. In my opinion, you scale as hard as you can until you fall down to like a 2x or a 3x, and then you just optimize for profit after. So, like, obviously it's gonna be different from person to person, but if you're at the point where, like, you're spending $30K a month and you're trying to get to the point where you're spending $250, like, you can't be so married to whatever ROAS you're getting when you're spending 30, because it's just a completely different ball game as you're scaling. Because at the end of the day, if you go from, like I said before, like a 5x at $30K a month to a 3x at $250, you're making way more money at $250, even though your ROAS is lower. And then principle number 5, which will kind of tie together what I was talking about nicely, is this whole, like, snowball effect and the idea of your ROAS compounding over time. So when you run a multi-funnel approach, and like I kind of described it before, it's almost like this big spider web, you're constantly scaling month over month, you start to have this effect where you have more and more people in your ecosystem that you haven't converted yet. So let's say, like, your first month of ads, you gain like 1,000 people on your email list. And I'm just saying email list as a, like, representation of people in your ecosystem who haven't bought from you yet. And then, like, a few months later, you have 10,000 people. And then a few months later, you have 100,000 people. There's a ton of profit left in this snowball, and it's just, like, compounding over time as it's going downhill. So there's tons of profit to be made in terms of just, like, getting your overall following and ecosystem bigger in terms of, like, volume of people, and then just running, like, big liquidation events, like big challenges, big webinars, etc., to kind of, like, chip off big pieces of the snowball. So, and like, also, like, beyond, running challenges, webinars, etc., like, even just testing more messaging. As people become more aware of who you are and what your offer is, like, you're going to be able to hit these people with new messaging, social proof, kind of like these more unconventional angles that are going to attract people. Because, like, for example, a lot of your ads might be the standard, like, okay, if you want X result, or if you have X pain point, like, here's this business model. But then, like, as you build up this snowball, you kind of give yourself the ability to test, like, more new messaging, where it's like, it's stuff that you wouldn't necessarily test in the beginning, but you have more budget, you have more scale to test into, you need to launch more ads, etc. And that could be what helps you liquidate people within this snowball. So I'm kind of rambling a bit, but you get the point. Like, as you're scaling and you're on your way to your goals, whatever your goals are, $1 million a month, 500K a month, 2 million a month, whatever it may be, you have to understand this principle where it's like, if you're compounding your spend month over month, you're getting more eyeballs every single month, which just means you're giving yourself more people in your ecosystem that you can continue to just, like, pick off, like, one by one. And eventually that just leads to a lot of extra, net profit at the bottom line of your business, even if you're not spending a ton more on ads. Because, like, for example, and I promise I'm gonna stop rambling so much, but, like, I've seen clients where, like, they were spending a couple $100K a month, and then, like, for whatever reason, like, they have something wrong with the offer and they completely dial back the spend, but, like, they'll go a few months with, like, pretty stable revenue, even though they're not spending more money on ads, just because of how many people were in this snowball. So you kind of get the point I'm trying to make. It's like growing the snowball month over month is essentially just growing your potential customer base. That's probably a way easier way to say it. But also this other principle too, where it's just like, when you have more people being brought into your ecosystem, and this is especially prevalent today, just because of how much nurturing people need, just because of how low trust is when it comes to info products, you kind of need to warm people up more than you did in the past. So when you hit people dozens of times over with new creatives, over weeks and months of time, to new conversion mechanisms, like all the stuff we've been talking about in this phase, with new messaging that kind of just hits them from different angles, that's often what you need to make a large percentage of people convert. So you make it through the valley of despair, like we talked about in step number 2, to the point where you can actually see this happen, to where, like, you have prospects that are telling you, like, yeah, I've been seeing your ads for months, or I, like, feel like I can't escape your ads. Like, that's what you want, because you've completely broken out of that entire valley of despair to the point where you're scaling a lot easier in phase number 3. So I hope this video was valuable for you guys, but obviously there was a lot that went into this video and you still might be a little bit overwhelmed. You still might be a little bit unsure of if you can actually get results for yourself or for your client's info product. And with that being said, this is where I'm going to shamelessly pitch you, because if you've made it to this point in this video, obviously you found it valuable to some extent, or you're just really bored. So if you want to work with me directly, whether you're an info product owner or you're an operator slash service provider, you want to just get better at running ads, or if you're an info product and you want me to run your ads for you or give you consultations on your paid ads approach, I'd be more than happy to. All you have to do is click the link down below this video. You'll land on a page that looks something like this, and you can just apply to work with us. You'll be speaking with me directly, and I look forward to seeing that application come through. But whether your application comes through or it never does, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you got some value out of it, and I'll see you in the next one.